Hi class, this is Mr. James. This is actually going to be our final lesson for the school year. And now, just a few things as we wrap up. Since today's our last lesson, we'll have one final homework assignment. And then next week on Tuesday, I'll actually post the test. You'll have the whole week to complete it. And you guys can take your time working on it whenever you can. That will be our final grade. After that, grades will be final. I'll total up your note test grades as well, and that'll pretty much be it. So I hope you guys enjoy. Take notes. Anything highlighted in yellow, please write it down and submit the notes, as that is a big grade for you guys to help raise your grade. Well, like I said, we're looking at the post-resurrection. So after Jesus' resurrection, we're looking at the fishing trip. Now our memory verse is John 21:7, which says, "Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garments around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water." Now this lesson brings us to our conclusion of the study on the life of Jesus and what has happened in the Gospels. So we begin the lesson that the disciples were about 80 miles north of Jerusalem, and 7 disciples were gathered in a boat in which they had been fishing all night. Peter had said that he was going fishing, and as evidence of his strong leadership and influence, 6 of the disciples went with them. These men were professional fishermen, but they didn't catch a thing. They were professional fishermen before they met the Lord, and they answered his call to become fishers of men. So it was quite unusual for them to not catch a fish. As dawn came, the 7 tired, disgusted fishermen, angry, mad maybe, were empty-handed, sitting more than 100 yards off the beach, and they were startled by a voice. The man implied that he knew that they hadn't caught fish, and he asked, "Do you have any meat?" I suppose you have no meat, in other words. Reminds us that Jesus was omniscient. He knows all things. The disciples conceded to him, and they had indeed caught nothing. Then he told them to just cast their nets on the right side of the ship. They did so, and no doubt somewhat reluctantly. And upon doing so, they caught a ton of fish. John was the first disciple to recognize this as a work of God, that Peter was the first to head to shore. The contrast between these two personalities, Peter and John, is very interesting. Both of them raced to confirm Mary's announcement of the empty tomb, but John outran Peter and looked into the tomb. But when Peter caught up, he not only looked in, but actually entered the tomb, it says. Now in this scene, Peter was the first to head toward the Lord, but John was the first to recognize the hand of the Lord. Still, God used both of these men. Arriving at the shore late, Peter saw the Lord standing by a fire with fish already cooking. As the rest of the disciples arrived, Peter rushed back to the boat, pulled in the fish. The meal was prepared, and Jesus said, "Come on and dine," or "Come eat with us." Jesus calls us to be fishers of men. Our responsibility is to share the gospel with the lost. But many of us have to admit we have caught no fish, or we've put no effort into sharing the gospel with others. The Lord changed the disciples. "No, we've caught no fish," to "Oh, we have lots of fish." We can also change our negative response if we will just cast our net and listen to Jesus, what he has to say, where he is leading us to go, what store he is leading us to go into, or the person he is leading us to talk to. As the disciples gathered around the coals of the fire, the Lord faced Peter with the goal of restoring him to the fellowship. Remember, 3 times Peter had denied the Lord beside a fire. Now Jesus asked him a piercing question 3 times. The question of, "Do you love me?" It pierces our hearts even today as it did Peter's. Imagine if your mom or your dad or even your sibling looked at you and said, "Do you love me?" 3 times. You might be frustrated, thinking, why do you doubt me? Peter had been with Christ for 3 years. He had grown to love him so much that he claimed that although others might forsake the Lord, he would not. But when the moment of testing came, he failed. Peter's heart was still full of guilt as he stood beside this fire in Galilee. He could hardly look at his Lord, but the Lord looked at Peter. And that's what he does to us. When we feel guilty, Jesus is still looking at us because he knows that he had paid the price for our sins. The thought of, he knows that I love him, might have been Peter's thought. Jesus had given Peter a new name, because it was Peter, Simon Peter, but he never used it when referring to him because Peter had to earn the right to be called a rock. At this point in his life, he was still just a small pebble. In his initial question, the Lord used the stronger word for love, the Greek word agape. Agape. The word refers to a love that is willing to sacrifice oneself. Peter replied using a different word, another word, or a different type of love, the Greek word phileo. Christ's change in words grieved Peter. Probably refused to use agape because the guilt he felt over his recent denials of Christ was still weighing on his conscience. He felt unworthy using the word. Jesus followed each of his questions up, and Peter's replies with a variously worded command to feed my sheep, or to provide spiritual food, or act as a shepherd. Peter would never forget that moment because he did indeed love Jesus, and God would use him greatly in the years to come. So, we can compare Jesus' first calling of Peter, the call in this lesson. Peter was called to become a fisher of men after a miraculous catch of fish, and here he was restored to his calling after a catch of fish. Peter lost his fellowship by a fireside, and here his fellowship with Christ is restored. Christ told Peter that he would die as an old man, but he didn't tell him how he would die, except to say that men would carry him to his death. Well, Peter was crucified for his faith, just like Jesus, but instead he requested to be crucified upside down because he didn't want to die the same way Jesus did. He felt unworthy. Jesus told Peter, follow me, and when he asked about John's future, the Lord just told him, don't worry about John, but be faithful to your own commitment. That's true to us today. Don't worry about others, be faithful to your own commitment. The gospel here is the gospel of restoration, that through Jesus, he's restoring us and making us new, just like he did with Peter, he's doing with us. So, anything you see highlighted in yellow like this, sorry this wasn't highlighted, but please write this down, the gospel of restoration. Please put in your notes. And besides that, complete your homework and enjoy your weekend, guys. Bye.